So my name is Yuanchun. I'm a CS department professor. I got my 3 degrees, my bachelor, master, and PhD, all from Tsinghua University, computer science. My research area is human-computer interaction, not pure AI. But I use AI methods for my research. For example, I use traditional AI methods like Bayesian reasoning to improve the accuracy of UI, like for your touchscreen input. We can improve the text entry accuracy by modeling human movement. And we also design and implement gestures for AR, for the future wearable devices. Actually, I also use machine learning methods to deal with the data-intensive problem like the language dialogue and language expressions. So I think I can now represent the typical AI professors, the view of them, because most of them are now in Hawaii for Triple I conference now. And I can roughly give some general landscape about China AI. So I can describe this in 3 aspects. The first is from the government side, as the ambassadors mentioned that the government recognize the value of AI technology. So we had, the government had issued several research plans, as you mentioned, in 2017, in July. We have the new generation artificial intelligence development plan. And then the government has released several research funding, especially for AI development. The Ministry of Science and Technology have several plans. Each of them may support about several million of RMB, so for the research. And the local government have set up many AI science parks, like in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. So we have some industries and new technology in this kind of science park. And the second aspect is from the academic and education aspects. By now, as I know, there are more than 30 universities in China has established AI school, specially designed for the AI, to educate AI talents. And some of the universities, like Tsinghua Universities, has set up the AI Research Institute, just for the research, not especially curriculum for students. And in China, we also have some academic society, like the Chinese Association of AI and China Computing Federation. They also held many conference and workshops on AI, which encourage the research and industry to have collaboration for new technologies. And the third aspect is from, I think it's the industry. To some white books, we can get to know the growth of China AI industry is quite high. It's about 60% each year, the growth, I mean. And actually, to my personal experience, some of my students have their AI startups. It's now very difficult for the AI talents to raise money for their startups, their entrepreneurs. I think maybe Dr. Pu may have more detailed information about the industry.
Maybe this is the perfect segue, no pun intended.
Yes. So my name is Pu, and as Bob introduced, I got my PhD here in EPFL in the Artificial Intelligence Lab when this building was still a field with cows. And then I moved to the US, to Silicon Valley, worked on Twitter headquarters for the ads team. Basically, what I did is using artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to show ads to you so that you could click more. This is maybe not the most wanted usage of AI, but it's a quite lucrative business. And after 2 years in Silicon Valley, I moved back to China and joined Segway. As part of the merger between two companies, Segway Inc., which is a US company based in New Hampshire, and another company called Ninebot, a Beijing-based startup. The two companies were actually making very similar things, like the self-balancing vehicle. Segway was more well-known, but in the end, the two companies merged into one. And as part of the merge, we wanted to create a robotic division as a new inside the new company, and I went back to China to start this robotics division. It's actually also part of a international collaboration because Intel is a very important sponsor of this new department. And the reason that Intel wanted to invest in this area is because, like Bob mentioned, for AI, you need the algorithm, the computational power, and also application. So Intel has the algorithm were ready, and the computational power is what they can provide, and we want to find out what the application would be. So we spent about 3 years, developed a entertainment mobility robot and also delivery robot. We want to use those robots to do autonomous delivery in a short range, because most of the things and people moving was in a short range, is actually in a short range in 1 to 5 kilometers. So we want to use clean energy, the electric powered vehicles to move things around. And we use AI technologies like computer vision, like SLAM, simultaneous mapping and localization, and to power those robots and deliver goods from the dispatch center or the restaurant to the destination of the user. I think it's very interesting to witness or be part of the progress of the AI development in the past 3 years. I would say it's quite accelerated process because of the government policies, also because of the venture capital funds that were pouring into this system. In fact, I read some numbers. About half of the venture capital investment in AI, in the field of AI, happened in China in last 2 years. So it's very, when there's a lot of funding, people would be concentrate, would be go to the same direction, and all the AI talents would come together into the startup companies and work on different areas. I would say the healthcare, the autonomous driving automobile, the robotics, and also security are the most important sectors that we found in the past several years. There's hundreds of new startups were founded, and we were just one of them. So it's very good to come back to EPFL. I think in Switzerland, what we have is the core technologies, like in computer science, in microengineering, and in many other aspects as well. The previous wave of startups in China were mostly in a way of changing the business model, creating a new business a new business model by using internet, for example, or smartphones. But the next wave would definitely be the core technology, the deep technologies in this sector. And I think there could be a lot of collaboration between China and Switzerland, also Europe as a whole.
Thank you for this introduction, Adam.
Thank you. So I'm very much the imposter here on a couple of different fronts. First, most obvious one is that I'm obviously not Chinese. I have, however, been engaging with the country for probably the last 10 years or so, living between the UK and China, including several years spent at Beida, Peking University, just up the road from Tsinghua. Arch enemies, arch rivals there. I'm also, just as His Excellency was pointing out on when he was on stage, I'm an imposter in that I'm also not, I'm not a coder, apart from in my spare time. I'm not a professional working in this field. In fact, quite the opposite. My background is in humanities, in kind of hardcore Chinese literary texts, classical Chinese, that kind of thing. About, probably 5-6 years ago, however, much to the kind of disdain of my professors and tutors at Oxford, I started to turn my hand to technology policy and the way in which internet technologies are regulated within China. And ever since then, really, that's kind of where my heart has been. Artificial intelligence is obviously a huge topic in China, and it covers so many different bases, as Li Pu was kind of alluding to. I think the kind of core interesting points, I think, to be honest, the industries that we really want to look at, healthcare is a huge one. A lot of issues in China related to that. Smart cities, obviously another interesting area. And security, again, as you pointed out. And there are a few points within there that we may or may not touch upon today that do tend to get picked up a lot in the kind of foreign media and in the foreign press. Somewhat more so than they perhaps should be doing. But nonetheless, I look forward to the discussion. I think we'll cover some good points today.
Thank you. Just to keep it broad in the beginning, I would like to ask the following question. Where is China today in terms of AI? Where was it 10 years ago? And where will it be in 10 years from now? Any projections? And also a historical perspective, maybe?
I think I was reading the other day that the Triple AI conference that happens in the US, I think it was 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, there were no papers from Chinese researchers. Last year, for the first time, there were more papers by Chinese researchers than there were from any other country, including the US. So I think as a very, very basic, crude metric of academic output, I think that gives us some insight into kind of where China is at the moment and where it's heading, really.
Maybe 10 years. 10 years before, there would be there is no so many AI school in Chinese universities. So nowadays we have about 30 more AI school just established in these recent years. So there will be more AI talents in these years, maybe. In the future, I hope that most of them will go to industry to have the innovation in the AI area, like machine learning, robots, and the more applications. So I hope so.
Yeah, I think right now the current status in China is that the AI talents are very rare, and people have to, like even the startup companies has to pay maybe twice or 3 times the average salary to hire those guys because there are like not so many of them. I think with the new students studying AI in the universities, I think maybe in 10 years they will be working like in every different sector of the industry, and in the factories, in the healthcare, in the finance sector as well. It will be like AI department in every company.
Mm-hmm. And how present would you say is AI already in people's lives in China today?
Yes, in some means, I think AI is becoming realistic. For example, there are many face recognition applications in our daily life. And even in most of the cases, you need not to pay any cash. You just show your mobile phone for the daily life. And for the healthcare, we can we can see there are more and more AI assistants in the hospital to help to analyze the X-ray pictures and some and deal with some problems. Help for the doctor, and even in the entertainment, and there are more and more AI technology there. So, but there could be more in the future. So maybe Puli have more.
And I guess
examples.
China is not China, right? There's a big divide between the huge cities and the countryside. What would be your assessment on that population? Will AI close this gap, or is there maybe even the potential to widen this gap? How do you see the role of technology there?
It's closing the gap, I think.
Yeah.
But most of the new companies, AI companies, locates in the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. But the technology applications will benefit the whole society. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same way as Professor Shi, because I read an article about several months ago about the best high school in China. They set up an online teaching system using AI and internet technologies to give the lectures to the most remote schools in the mountain area, so that those students could get the same level of education as the students in the big cities. I think that could definitely make the gap smaller. And in everyday life, I would say, like we have a news aggregator app, which is used a lot by people, and that app uses recommender algorithms to recommend personalized contents to each specific user. And also there are some food delivery apps that would use the same type of algorithms to solve the ultimate life problem of what to eat at lunch. And for us, like in Segway, we have our factories, and the factories in China are also using robotics, robot arms, industrial robots to do things like stacking, and for some repetitive tasks, the robot would take care. And it's like the workers and the robots co-working at the same assembly line. So I think those are all the things that really started to AI technology already changed our life in China.
I think the regional divide is an interesting point to pick up on, however, because coming back to the AI roadmap that you discussed at the beginning, this kind of grand plan that the Chinese government set out, the central government set out, much like many other grand plans that Beijing tries to implement, this is very much a kind of top-level document that kind of set out general objectives, general claims, fairly vague in many senses, to then be picked up by local provinces and regions and cities, industries and what have you, to kind of develop in their own particular direction and to invest in their own particular direction as well. And so what that means is that you have spread out across the country a kind of lots of different hubs, lots of different kind of applications of artificial intelligence within different contexts. This doesn't necessarily speak to a divide as such, but more that innovation is very dispersed within China. There are, of course, kind of core centers like Shenzhen or Yuanchun in Beijing or what have you, but at the same time, you also have kind of emerging areas such as in Guizhou, the kind of big data hubs that you have down there. And like I said, this tends to kind of divide things up. But then also to come back to your kind of introductory remarks, Bob, when you were talking about the fact that actually there's still a fairly large percentage of the Chinese population that isn't connected to the internet, and that population is obviously concentrated within rural areas. That has a couple of different effects, really. One, it means that there are large portions of the population that are not being datafied as such, they're not being kind of inputted into any kind of data sets for, to be processed by algorithms, with potential impacts there. But it also means, if you look at, there are certain programs, such as, it could be kind of Sesame Credit, it could be social credit systems, whereby those that are not connected to the internet, those that are not within kind of core urban centers, are also not necessarily feeling the benefits that kind of AI-driven services could offer.
Speaking of this general landscape, I would be curious to take a quick bird's eye view on the economic AI landscape, and maybe Pu, you would be a good person to pose this question to. In America, there's GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. Is there an equivalent like that in China? Also in the US, we have Silicon Valley. Is there something like that in China? So are there these parallels, or is it a completely different world?
Yes, it's very comparable, I would say. Like in the US, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and in China, the equivalent would be Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And recently, there is a ByteDance, which is the company, I think the biggest company, still not got IPO'd at this moment.
Worth more than Facebook now. Their total value is worth more than Facebook, ByteDance now.
Yeah, so it's those companies, I think, would be equivalent as a big companies in Silicon Valley, and all those companies actually are in like big cities like in Beijing, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou. Hangzhou is where Alibaba is located. It's like Amazon located in Seattle, right? So it's there's also a area of intellectual tenants or AI tenants concentrated, like near Tsinghua University. There's a Tsinghua Science Park. That's close to Yuanchun that Adam just mentioned. So it's like Stanford, right? It's like Stanford Science Park, and startups are concentrating around it. Actually, our startup is also not far from that area. It's actually inside the area, and I think it's it's kind of a mirror of what happens in the US, in Silicon Valley, but there is also some difference. I think the biggest difference is that in China, there's a big sector of manufacturing, where in the US, currently there's not as big as in China. So AI would change a lot in manufacturing sector as well, because first of all, the population of age from 18 to 60 is actually start to decline in China right now. So the number of workers would be smaller in the future. Of course, it's not going to be like a rapid change, but we definitely need robots, need automation, and also AI technologies to continue to produce those products in manufacturing factories. So I think that's another very big area that is unique to China.
You're a serial entrepreneur. Say I want to start a startup in China. What's the recipe? What's the process?
It's a process.
I think it's like the professor mentioned here in EPFL, in universities, there would be the seed funds from the university and incubating innovations. And when the IP is mature enough, the venture capitals that are actually very good friends with professors in universities, and they know what they are doing, and they will come automatically. So if you have the technology, you don't need to worry. If it's top, like the most advanced technology, you don't need to worry about money, because it will come automatically. And actually, there is a very big competition between the venture capital firms in order to get those deals, because those are the actual driving power of the whole new innovation. And then it's like a normal process of what people would say in a TV show, Silicon Valley. It got the new funding and expand the business, and if it's going good, then more fund will come.
What is the Western perspective on this? Adam, you run a market entry consultancy that supports Western companies open up the Chinese market for them.
Yeah.
What do they need to be careful about?
Let's start. Yes, you're right. So yeah, the last 5 years or so, I decided to try and make some money outside of academia and research and journalism, what have you. And so yes, we advise foreign companies from kind of across the spectrum really on market entry strategy, most of which revolves around kind of legal and bureaucratic kind of points of sticking. I mean, the number one concern is always intellectual property. This is something I think that has changed over the last few years, and concerns that foreign companies used to have been somewhat allayed. And there are many companies now in China that are taking the kind of issue much more seriously. Alibaba, chief among those, I think. But still, it's kind of at the forefront of many people's minds. For many companies, even things like copywriting and trademarking, what have you, China has a slightly obscure legal system when it comes to that. So they operate a first-to-file system, which basically means that literally whoever turns up and files your trademark first gets it. There are countless cases of very, very large foreign companies who have pitched up in China and decided that they want to give it a go, only to find that some plucky Chinese guy in his bedroom has registered their company name 5 years earlier, and they then have to pay $100,000 to get that trademark back. So that's always, it's a slightly kind of banal kind of example, but nonetheless, intellectual property is obviously a kind of a key feature there. But like I said, things are getting easier. There are increasing numbers of joint ventures within artificial intelligence, within the kind of technology sphere, both as foreign companies try to enter the Chinese market for obvious reasons, but also as Chinese companies try to internationalize. We've seen companies like WeChat within Tencent that have tried in the past to kind of expand beyond their own borders and reach out into other markets with very limited successes. And there are all sorts of reasons for that, which we don't need to go into here now. But then you also have companies like ByteDance that we mentioned before, these huge behemoths, the world's most valuable startups, worth more than Uber now. And they are quite successfully entering into many third markets. So they're making quite big inroads into the US now with TikTok, Douyin. For many weeks, I think for 4 or 5 weeks last year, it was the most downloaded app in the US. But also in many kind of more emerging markets in Brazil, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. These are platforms that are starting to kind of, like I said, make quite significant inroads there. And as a result, we're also having to confront many of the issues that perhaps they wouldn't have had to deal with necessarily within their own domestic context. So a good example of this would be TikTok in the US, which recently has come under a lot of scrutiny because of far-right extremist views and child pornography circulating on the platform. There were not the kind of inbuilt mechanisms to be able to filter that out within the kind of Chinese context. But suddenly, being a large company in the US and having to kind of reckon with such issues has put kind of quite significant pressure on the company as it tries to internationalize.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One big topic that always comes about AI is the trust versus fear that we put in it. And there's always this double-edged sword. There are the dark Terminator visions, and then there is the Brave New World where all diseases can be cured, and there are always these two sides. And it tips this way, it tips that way sometimes. What is the general attitude you would say towards AI in China? Is it bullish? Do people trust the technology? Are they looking forward to it? Or is there a lot of skepticism? And I'm not talking so much among researchers, but more among regular John Doe, or what the Chinese equivalent would be.
I see actually there are many talks about the role of AI in the society, but I think people, if they can experience the benefits of the new technology, they could more trust about the new technology. So I think in the reality now people can benefit from some real applications. So they can see that, they can imagine that in the future there will be more and more robots, more new technologies that can, instead of some labors, but they can also benefit from the new technology that as what they can experience nowadays. So I think researchers will pay more attention to the real technologies and what can real benefit the daily life. So that will help the people to understand more about the new technology. It could not be so afraid of that.
I think it also has one thing that's discussed a lot in the Western media these days is the social credit system, where I guess this question of trust versus fear is also very important. In the West, the attitude is always you would fear Big Brother watching you here. I think in China, the attitude is a bit different. People see positive sides also in such a system where it's more incentivizing good behavior rather than only punishing bad behavior. Maybe Adam, I think you've spent some time in one of the smaller Chinese places that have only 500,000 people, where
that's right.
There was an experiment going on, right?
Yeah, so the social credit system is an interesting case study, I think. For those that haven't heard of it, it's if you type it into Google, you'll immediately be served all sorts of results about it being something out of Black Mirror or something straight out of 1984, which is perhaps a little unfair. But nonetheless, it certainly within the kind of context of the Western media, it has garnered a lot of attention as being this kind of AI-driven AI kind of driven surveillance state, essentially. Perhaps in an attempt to try and move beyond these kind of tropes. As Bob alluded to, I spent several months last year visiting several pilot projects of how the social credit system was being kind of implemented on the ground. And the key concept behind social credit is this idea that it's about fostering greater trust across different areas of society, within the judiciary, within industry, within society, and within government as well. And very similar to the AI roadmap the Chinese government published back in 2014, kind of overarching social credit plan, which has then been kind of interpreted and implemented by a number of different pilot schemes across the country. So there are about 46 official pilot cities now implementing this, all to varying degrees in varying states. The interesting thing about the way that we think about social credit in the West is we think of it being a kind of unified score that follows everybody around. So, and this is the case in certain areas. So one particular project I was looking at was a city called Rongcheng in Shandong province, whereby every citizen, about 650,000 so people, starts off with 1,000 credit points, and those points go up or down dependent on certain behaviors which are kind of laid out in kind of dozens of different policy documents. This kind of harks to it kind of plays very nicely to a particular narrative that we have in Europe and the US of kind of Chinese control state and surveillance state, and that this is a kind of AI-driven kind of aggregated score. which, like I said, is perhaps a little bit unfair. This is a very, very manual process. It's still very much paper-based. But nonetheless, it's a good example of, I think, a mindset of trying to kind of link together different kind of forms of data, different data points into a kind of single unified government scheme, and to kind of bring together private and public actors in a way that I think we don't necessarily see in Europe and nor in the US. I think a good example of this is that, so take Google, for example, and the very kind of negative pushback that they've had, both within the general public, but also within the company itself, at the work that they've been doing with governments around the world. So in the UK, for example, where I'm from, the Google DeepMind rather formed a partnership with the NHS, our National Health Service, to gain access to their data at Moorfield Eye Hospital. And when this was revealed, when this kind of came out in the media, there was this huge pushback from the British public, and Google and the government were put under significant pressure to end that relationship. Within the US context, you look at Google's partnerships with the Pentagon, the DoD, with kind of drone warfare and kind of image recognition there. Again, significant pushback within the company as well as within the public more widely. And then to kind of bring the China angle in as well, over the last 6 months or so, we've seen a lot of internal pressure around the so-called Project Dragonfly, so Google's attempt to re-enter the Chinese market. And again, I think at the last count, there were well over 1,000 employees within Google who had signed an open letter saying that they were not happy with the fact that Google were doing this and working with government agencies, with American government agencies, to kind of get back into China. Compare that with, I think, a readiness among a lot of Chinese companies to work quite closely with the Chinese government in a number of different ways, whether that be within the provision of AI for security and surveillance, or whether it be within the context of, for example, building smart cities. So I think recently in Jiangsu province, Alibaba has signed up to provide smart city services for 30 or so different cities now. And I think this intersect between public and private actors in China, whether it be within social credit or smart cities or healthcare, is fascinating, I think, and really on a kind of completely different level to what we see anywhere else in the world.
One of the most burning questions on Pigeonhole here is, what is the Chinese discourse like about things like social credit score? What, both at a structural level, kind of how is it conducted? Where does it take place? Does this discourse take place on social media, in TV shows, in the newspapers, and also what are the typical attitudes that are being discussed?
I'd love to hear the opinion from these guys, but first of all, I'd love to also point out that we as foreigners, non-Chinese, tend to think of China in very, very crude terms, right? In a very kind of uniform way, which is obviously gross oversimplification. I think there's no better example, really, of the vibrancy of debate that goes on in China around AI and social credit and whatever else you want to kind of throw in there, than the fact that whenever there's any major article, whether media or academic or otherwise, published about artificial intelligence and its capabilities and its implications and what have you in the US or Europe, immediately that article is translated into Chinese and is circulating within WeChat groups, it's circulating online, and is generating a lot of debate and a lot of commentary. What we don't see is that happening in the other direction at all. There is a huge amount of debate within the Chinese language sphere talking about exactly the same kind of issues, but that flow is completely one-directional. There's obviously reasons for that based around language and what have you, but I think as we kind of move into the next few years of interaction between China and other countries, I think that kind of needs to change a little bit. But what's your opinion on this?
I actually didn't know there's like a social credit score. I only know that there's like the financial credit score system has been established in China in the past few years, and I think that's the most important part of the scoring system. Absolutely. In people's everyday life, and that actually use AI technology. Like Alibaba have this yes, Sesame credit score, and I can, for example, borrow a car without get the down payment or get the what do you call it, the guarantee. With a high enough credit score, I can use that as a guarantee. So I think it's definitely like affecting many aspects of the everyday life.
I think this is, I mean, the question you asked earlier about, how visible, how prevalent is AI in the ordinary lives of people kind of day to day. I think Sesame Credit is probably the shining example of this. So as you said, it's this idea that you do have a credit score in the palm of your hand that pulls on several hundred, if not several thousand different data points gathered across Alibaba's kind of whole spectrum. Alibaba obviously owning many, many different companies. And like you said, that this has kind of massively disrupted finance in China. With good reason as well. China does not have a history of giving credit. It's a banking sector that has historically been dominated by state players, quite conservative in their lending practices. And for many people in society, whether it be entrepreneurs, whether it be students who didn't have access to easy finance, this was a game changer. Yeah. What you now see is that kind of questions around what different data points are being pulled from this to kind of bring into the credit score being asked. Does it kind of tie into who your social network is? Does it tie into what your messages are and what have you? But coming again to the question here, there's also a lot of debate around that in China. You go onto any number of Chinese social media platforms and you search for Sesame Credit, and you will see people debating, how can I game the system? How can I increase it? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that kind of thing?
Yeah. Lipu, you were at Segway/Ninebot at a very interesting point when the two married, basically, when the two got merged, or one took the other, however way exactly it was. But there was a merger of I guess, corporate cultures also, right? This Segway, an American company, Ninebot, a Chinese company. How was this completely frictionless, or were there unexpected surprises when this is happening? What is the communication within the company now across the continents?
The story was actually acquisition. Ninebot acquired Segway. Segway was founded in 1999, so it was quite old company, and they got a lot of money from venture capitals from the US, and Ninebot got same spectrum of venture capitals like Sequoia and GIC, etc. Those venture capitals, and the reason that Ninebot acquired Segway was there were technology advancements inside Ninebot, and they developed a new generation of technology in terms of drivetrain of electric. Short distance electric cars, and that technology would reduce the cost by like 90%. So Segway realized that this is not going to be a fair war. So the two companies actually merge into one. Inside the merger itself, actually, the venture capital and the venture lending part also plays their role to fund this acquisition.
And these days, how is the corporate language in the company is Chinese or English?
We have headquarters in Beijing and offices in New Hampshire, in Seattle, and also in Amsterdam here in Europe. So I think the way it's very like an international company, like people communicate if needed in English, and but the local conversation mostly in Chinese in Beijing.
Thank you. We have only a few minutes left, so I would basically maybe close the round with a provocative question that came from the crowd. Why should I invest in China, not in Switzerland? Professor, shall we start with you?
So you can first.
I don't know. It seems obvious to me. It's scale. It's a land of opportunity, right? I mean, it's a cheesy line to kind of take, but I think the sheer pace of innovation, the government support, the connectedness of industry, like I said, the sheer size of the market, I think are all reasons that China is an incredibly exciting place to be doing business now, an incredibly exciting place to be investing in. Seems like a bit of a no-brainer to me, but then again, I don't run a VC, so I can't comment on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have this thinking about the time zone, like in different areas, the speed at the time goes on is different. I think right now in China, especially in those big cities like Beijing, Shenzhen, those are the places that the time goes the fastest, I think, in the world. So I think that's definitely one reason that one should invest there instead of in the slower regions. And the second reason, I think China is was a very big market and unified market. So and the foundation of that market, like the smartphone penetration rates and also the smart devices penetration rate are already quite high. So I think with that foundation, with this uniform market, it's definitely going to change a lot of things in the AI age.
Yeah, because AI has attracted more and more interest from the students, from the industry, from the VCs. I would like to see the more and more collaboration between academics with the industry and collaboration between China and the foreign countries. Actually, in Tsinghua University, we have established more and more collaboration program in education. And I am self as a dean of a new institute. This institute is called Global Innovation Institute, located in Seattle, US. We have collaboration with the University of Washington, with the initial funding from Microsoft. Actually, we have recruited 4 cohorts of students. More than half of them are international students. So students from China and from foreign countries are studying and working together now in Seattle and in Beijing. So more and more collaborations.
West Coast US, East Coast China. Okay, thank you very much. This has been a fascinating conversation for me. I've learned a lot. I hope you have had a similar experience. So let's thank our 3 panelists again.
Thank you.
Thank you.